Let's do it.
Well, Richard, how's it going, man? Thank you for doing this. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, John, and I appreciate you and your pod.
So, I mean, well, I appreciate a lot of your work. I mean, I'm a huge fan of everyone really who is inspired to create in this space. It's just amazing how inspiring this thing is, and then to see everyone kind of translating it in their own way, you know, with their own swagger and stuff like that. Like, I just love it. And your stuff has been incredible. I always love to see new drops. And so I just wanted to get together for a chat and kind of hear a bit of your story, your inspiration, your process, and whatever else you want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin, it definitely just brings out, like you said, it's just so inspiring. And Bitcoin itself is rather technical. But one thing is, like, you know, as I learned these technical aspects of Bitcoin, it really, like, I know it's not a person or it's an organism, as some people would say, but like these technical aspects of late, I've been utilizing that and trying to personify parts of Bitcoin. And that's one of the things I've been doing lately in regards to the music, and just trying to give this non-person thing human-like qualities.
Yeah, I like it. And I agree. You know, for a lot of people, this thing is probably fairly foreign, you know, because a lot of people aren't interested in economics or monetary history or technology or any of that kind of stuff. And I feel like, you know, a lot of the art that gets produced in the space, and yours in particular, like, it gives it that personal / emotional / aspirational dimension. And that is obviously far more appealing to people because everyone can relate to, I mean, that's kind of what art is, right? It relates to the emotional part or the inspirational part of someone rather than, you know, hardcore technical understandings of things. And I think that just makes it far more relatable. So when someone sees like your video, I think a recent one was Bitcoin is Hope, right? Where I think myself and Sailor had a little excerpt in it. And that's, you know, that's an appealing message that everyone can understand. Everyone understands the function or the feeling of hope. They might not immediately understand how Bitcoin fits into that picture, but giving them like a taste of, like, you know, opening a window, I guess, to that element of this phenomenon that maybe piques their interest and cause them to go further and learn more. I mean, I think that's the role of art generally. And I just love that, you know, you can call it propaganda in a way, you know, because all this stuff is kind of,
it is propaganda
promoting Bitcoin. But like I was thinking before we came on, like, what's the differentiating factor between like state propaganda and this? And I would say that, like, this is naturally inspired propaganda, right? It's like it's not being imposed on anyone. It's not for any particular end. It's just kind of, it's the result of inspiration, and it may serve the function of propaganda. It may serve the function of bringing people in and trying to get them to think about it in a certain way, I guess. But it's very different from like a state centralized, narrow sort of propaganda, I would say.
It's bottom up too. Like, the reason why I started doing this whole Bitcoin thing is I was just so inspired by it. It just consumed me all the time. And this is just out of my self-interest. And I make music and I do things like that. And I just want to spread the Bitcoin message. Some people do the same thing with, whether it be Christianity, Buddhism, whatever religion they're into, or whatever. It could be a sport. It could be basketball. So some people push it, you know? And from the state, when you talk about the state type propaganda, that's top down, where like there's some form of coercion or some form of force involved there. And so, like, when I think about this Bitcoin just inspiring us to like push its own message, it's all driven by like bottom up incentives rather than some centralized entity.
Totally. And I want to get into kind of the basis of your, you know, your background and coming into this, but what do you think it is, or maybe even just for yourself, like, what has it been that's been so inspiring about Bitcoin? Like, what do you think it is about Bitcoin that inspires you to take the time and the attention and everything that's required to actually produce this type of content, to do this type of work?
You know, for me personally, I was like, you know, the Bitcoin ethos, low time preference, all that stuff. I was always already doing that prior to Bitcoin, but Bitcoin gave that like avenue a viable option. You know, it made it like it optimized that option for people who do choose to take that path towards, like, you know, produce more than you consume type of lifestyle, where you're savers. It essentially incentivizes and assists savers. And that question you asked about, why do I think it's so inspiring? Was that the original part of the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know what it is exactly, but there's a lot of aspects that Bitcoin touches, and one thing that always comes back to me is this concept of time, and like this concept of time is like in a sense it almost gives this how do I say this Bitcoin network like with time, like our time is so limited on life, and it's absolutely scarce, and Bitcoin is the only thing that matches that scarcity of our time and here our time here on this planet.
Right. And that
Yeah,
attribute of it and the effect, like the consequence of having that attribute seems to be that it, in a weird way, allows you to most properly optimize your time as a result of having that quality, and as a result of being able to effectively trade time, with the highest fidelity ever, perhaps, with other people. And in that trade, in those exchanges, doing what exchange and trade always does, which is create more value or create more time, or at least, yeah, allow you to optimize your time, put more meaning into the amount of time you have, or something like that. And I
yeah,
think that's probably, yeah, I think that's an element of the inspiration that a lot of people draw from it. It certainly influences people's perception of time, in a number of different ways, both like in the sense of your own future, like, and perhaps in the possibilities or the security or the optionality that you have around your own future, because you have this tool. Like the future becomes a lot less anxiety inducing, and you have
hmm
a greater comfort with the future. But also in that kind of value judgment in terms of what should I do with my time. And I think it influences that thinking in a lot of people too, in for probably for multiple reasons and in multiple ways. But just to say that, I guess we're always confronted with that question every second of every day. It's like, what am I going to do with this time? And nestled within that is, well, whatever the answer to that question is, it's because I value that thing more than all other options available to me, let's say, in that given scenario or circumstance. And I think part of Bitcoin's capacity to inspire people is that it gives them more clarity on value itself, and therefore what to do with their time, and therefore who and what they want to become. And it's obviously a process. And what I find so interesting in observing all this is just seeing all the Bitcoiners out there beginning to grapple with this, and then seeing the manifestations of that process too. So in your case, like the art that you make public, and in other people's cases, writing or businesses or whatever, like these are all kind of manifestations of people establishing a new relationship with time, their future, and what they value, and how those things are being influenced by this tool in Bitcoin.
yeah. That's a lot to dig into. I don't know where where to attack that part, but I agree with pretty much all of that.
All right. Well, why don't we start with, because I know you've been making music and stuff like that for ages. I mean, I looked at your YouTube page and you got stuff there like a decade ago,
Yeah.
pre-Bitcoin, I presume. So what was the rabbit hole story for you? How did you first come into this, and then I guess realize, well, continue on down the rabbit hole as you realize more and more what this thing represents?
So originally, I made rap music and like made rap beats back when I was like 13, 14. And this is a long time ago. And then I just I learned via the internet, like on forums back when I was 13, 14 years old. And then I just kept doing it, kept doing it. And then over a time period, I got kind of I lost interest, not lost interest because I still made music, but I just stopped posting. I stopped sharing. I just made music just for myself. And then over a long period of time, and I got into Bitcoin, I think 2017 or so. After just not being as active on music, I got into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin just re-sparked that desire to start retelling new stories, because I was tired of doing the whole YouTube grind from 2010 to 2012. Like I was pretty like making a lot of weekly videos, trying to get the views, chasing the ad money, and it wasn't that much money either. And I got tired of it, and I stopped. Bitcoin re-inspired me to tell new stories from I guess the orange lens, you would say.
Mm.
And I just kept putting out the Bitcoin content since, and it's been like my muse to write melodies, there's sound design, all kinds of things.
And and so what year did you say the Bitcoin, you kind of got the Bitcoin thesis? You say 2017?
I mean, no, 2017, I started investing into it. I didn't get the Bitcoin thesis until like 2018, late 2018 or early 2019,
Right,
after a series of Andreas videos. And then I think it culminated with the Bitcoin Standard in 2019.
right.
And then I just kept consuming content since.
You know, I was thinking, as I was watching a bunch of your videos in preparation for this, and I'd seen most of the Bitcoin related ones, you know, intermittently as you publish them on Twitter. But my own consumption obviously has been oriented towards like Bitcoin related consumption for a while now. But in a Bitcoin denominated world, in a Bitcoin infused culture, let's say, I just feel like I think a lot of the music is maybe going to become oriented toward either like investigating, exploring, elevating, amplifying, celebrating these themes that you might that we often discuss in Bitcoin, whether they be hope or independence or freedom or truth. Like, because these are such meaningful topics, and this is such they're so abundantly and obviously imbued in Bitcoin, and they seem to be propagating in us as a result of our engagement with Bitcoin. Like to give it a little more context, like I think about a lot of the fiat music that we hear today,
Yeah.
whether it's rap or pop or whatever, but it's all so superficial, right? So superficial, just garbage, basically. It's just filled with fiat garbage. Even if the tunes, like oftentimes, like I can get down with, right? Like I almost hate it sometimes because I'll hear like some uber fiat artist and their super fiat lyrics, but like it's designed to get you to bob your head and move along with it, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I don't enjoy any other music than Bitcoin stuff, but I have a much like stronger response to music that still does that, right? Still's got a great beat and makes you bob your head and tap your foot or whatever, but it's infused with like lyrics and themes that are extremely meaningful. And I just like when the contrast is so evident because you put them next to each other, it makes me excited that like I think we're going to see far more of that music, because like yourself, people, a lot more people are going to be inspired to make it. And I think it's actually going to be good, right? It's not.
Yeah.
There's been categories of music in the past where people are trying to like, I don't know, promote their cause or focus in on a particular thesis, but it's kind of lame. And I just feel
Yeah.
like
Or
Bitcoin
preachy.
is,
It's lame or
yeah,
preachy.
exactly. But I feel like Bitcoin inspired music is actually gonna be dope as shit. And I can't wait to, like, I saw a tip actually, I think she, just a couple of days ago, I think she published a playlist or like what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, a playlist or a CD or something with like all of her tracks on one thing that you could just press play and listen to.
Mm.
And I look forward to more of that, because I think the combination of the musical talent and the rhythm and all that kind of stuff with the dealing with these themes that we all find so meaningful, is just going to be super appealing. And so,
You know,
you know,
as
you're
a
obviously a
music
part of that.
producer, when I do listen to like what you would deem the fiat music, I agree. Like a lot of it is pretty trash, but one thing I do appreciate is just the engineering, because the audio engineering has just gotten so
Sure.
much better, and the sound design. So that part still has me geeked, but the part that makes me feel like a child or gives me that joy of a child when I make this music is when I create something that I envision like a story, like whether it be whatever type of story that I want to tie to Bitcoin or even non-Bitcoin. The ones where I want to tell a story and I'm able to execute on that. And then I'm filled with this childlike joy, you know? And then when I share it with some people and then they feel that similar, or at least the feedback, it feels like it's similar, that's when I do get the goosebumps and I feel like the most fulfilled when making music. But like the fiat stuff, like you say, it has nice beats, nice melodies, and nice rhythms, and you know, you jam into it, right? And to me, I still enjoy that as well. Like, because a lot of the people who aren't into Bitcoin still love that stuff too. So I do enjoy that just from the engineering and sound design perspective. But the thing that makes me feel most like that childlike feeling is when I make something where I tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah. And interestingly enough, I mean, again, maybe I'm going a bit out on a limb here, but you could make the case that like the sound engineering aspect of modern music is kind of the proof of work aspect. You know, that stuff is actually
Yeah.
it's engineering, it's highly involved, it's highly skilled. But when it comes to the lyrics that are riding on top of that work, they're just fiat trash, and it's maybe it's mostly the sound engineering that's doing most of the legwork there, and that's what kind of keeps people uh well keeps people enjoying it, even if the lyrics are shitty, because
Because
like I said, I mean.
oh, go ahead, I'll just go. But in audio engineering, even things like there's songwriting, not in terms of lyrics or melodies, but even in just sound design, like because the audio as a medium is just amazing with frequencies. You can make certain parts darker or brighter, wider, further, all these things you can manipulate in just in sound design and audio engineering alone. There's songwriting involved in there. It's almost like I guess you would tie that in actual writing to how you punctuate or how you develop the rhythm of the sentences. But in audio engineering, you do the same, just
Right.
playing around with the stereo field and frequencies.
And to go back to what you said before, I mean, why do you think it fills you with that childlike sort of energy when you're dealing with, making music around Bitcoin related themes?
You know, for me, it's like when I do these videos, I start with an idea. Like I usually say a line. I'll just say when I just recently did a couple weeks ago, I did the song Runaway, where I covered Kanye's Runaway, and I did a Bitcoin version of it to it. I had this one line that only is just one line in the whole rap, but you start off with this line, and then you over time you build that idea of this line, and the line was, "There's a hole in the heart where the soul should be." That was the line that it just stuck with me for like weeks, and I couldn't write this rap verse, but it started from that line, "Hole in the heart where the soul should be," and then eventually I built the instrumental around it, build the rap around it, record the song, put it all, mix it, everything, do the audio engineering part, and then I started grabbing the video clips. I started doing the typography work, and then it all comes to like just it's almost like world building. Software engineers, they create apps and programs that people could dance in or utilize and operate in. And with songwriting and video editing, it's like you start with this. I started with this one idea, and I eventually built this little mini world that is within those 2.5 or 2 minute song, and that part, like just from like I had this inkling of an idea, and then to see it fully fleshed out, that's the part that makes me feel feel like a child.
Right. Because you kind of get to, like you said, create your own little mini world / story. I mean, as you're saying that, I think of the remnant one that you did as well. And like, I guess because I've noticed lately, am I right in saying that I think you're using some like AI imagery and stuff in some of your work? Or is
I am
that?
using a lot of AI imagery and text to speech generation. So like a lot of the AI for text, like yeah, so the AI imagery for sure. I don't actually create the AI imagery because my prompt writing, every time I do it, it's just bad. I just download people's cool AI imagery and line it up with mine. But
Right.
the text one is eerily creepy. I've done they've modeled rappers where I've done one with Pusha T and Kendrick Lamar, and they both sound eerily good. I've done
Yeah.
one where I had just the narration where like he sounds like a cool narrator, and I'm telling like this futuristic Citadel story about like 400 AB, 400 years after Bitcoin's after Genesis block, and it's scary. I'll say that it's scarily good, like how good this AI stuff is.
Yeah. No, so I didn't even realize. I mean, I kind of expected that it would exist, but I wasn't as familiar with the text to speech stuff. Like I'd seen the image generation and the chat bots and stuff, but not the text to speech. But your stuff, and I think one that Tip just recently released had like Tupac and Jay-Z
Yeah,
in it, and I was like, holy
I was
shit, like
inspired by
that is
her
good.
because she did one a couple months back when she first did Tupac and Jay-Z, and I was like, I looked it up, and then I did it, and yeah, it just sounds really, really good. And it does, to make the flow and everything work, it does require a little bit of mangling and audio editing, but in general, it's pretty darn good.
Yeah, I mean, just as an aside, like what happens to how we interpret like reality, basically, but certainly what we see in the digital, online and stuff, when faces and voice, like, have you seen the face generation shit. Like you see that Tom Cruise one where some guy like
Yeah, the deep
was
fakes.
yeah, the deep fakes. So when you can do
Yeah.
that with the image and then also with the voice, you know, like we're in such spooky territory where you have no idea if something's real or not, you know?
To me, it's a double-edged sword because like I obviously like I'm not gonna pay a bunch of these rappers, to make songs with me, or I'm not gonna like hire like these voice actors to make like just a quick Twitter video. So it gives a lot of people access to be creative. On the flip side, like we were just talking about, we started off with propaganda and things of that nature. Like this could be mass produced, and like people wouldn't be able to discern the difference between reality and fake. And so, yeah, double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah, well, that certainly seems to be where we're going. Do you see yourself as like someone who's trying to promote Bitcoin? Like, are you trying to propagandize, or is this just like you can't help but do it?
I do feel like I I would say on the edge. I would say yeah. I would say I'm propagandizing. Yeah. I truly think this is like just paradigm shifting just technology, and like it's changing the way I view the world, and it's redefining words for me. So yeah, I hope to, because I find tremendous value interacting with Bitcoin. So when I make these songs and messages, I hope people can the people who are already into Bitcoin, because I think my stuff is not for like new people into Bitcoin, but it's to like make hodlers even more convicted, or I guess. So yeah,
Mm,
I would say to embolden the hodlers and just double down on your conviction.
yeah, well, I certainly think it has that effect because I know a lot of people love it. How has Bitcoin changed how you see the world or influenced your perspective?
The for me it's the Austrian perspective. Like when I first got into Bitcoin, like Andreas really taught me why this is important. Then after diving down to Saifedean's work, and then I just dove down like the Austrian rabbit hole and just read a lot of work from there. It just really helped me. I guess they call it praxeology, but it helped me just deduct and observe all kinds of things in life outside of Bitcoin, whether it be nutrition or whether it be anything. I can. It helps me more clearly see the world and better explain and articulate my thoughts and ideas.
Isn't that a trip? That something can
It
have that
is.
effect?
Yeah, and just from like just because I put a little bit of money into it in 2017, because I was, I want to make some money, but and then come for the money, stay for the money, and then
Right.
change your worldview. It's like, yeah, it's pretty nuts.
It's totally nuts. Do you have like friends, peers, family that either see your work or have noticed, you know, that shift and have questions about it, or have you orange pilled everyone in your life? Or
Well, my brothers are both pretty orange pilled now. They're not on Bitcoin Twitter like that. And I guess majority Bitcoiners aren't on Bitcoin Twitter, but like
yeah,
my
probably.
brothers, they're pretty orange pilled. I do remember though, back in 2019, it is a short little story. I remember reading, I think it was like the fourth part in Brandon Quitten's Mycelium essay series or something. And I just called my big brother and I was just telling him like, oh, we gotta like be symbiosis with Bitcoin, and I was just telling him it's gonna change human evolution, blah blah blah. And he's like, bro, he thought I was crazy.
Bro, settle
But
down. Take it
yeah,
easy.
after 2020, pretty much everybody, like at least in my close circles, like understood the thesis and just humbly stacked after 2020
Really?
and the response to it all. Yeah.
Wow. That's impressive. I got people in my life that get the thesis, but not totally. Like I think they're kind of hedging, you know, they're like, oh, like
Mm.
this seems to be something new and seems to be not going away. And John's not completely insane. So like there's maybe we should listen to him a tiny bit, but definitely not like seeing the orange light sort of orange pilled. So if you've got people that are just on the humble stack and you know on the grind that way, that's or several people in your life that are doing that, that's pretty impressive. Um, what do you think? Like, is this is making music your career, or do you want it to be, or you know, how do you see this evolving over time?
I don't know how yet. I'm just a legit pleb. I used to be former military. Now I work a blue collar job. I solder. I manage properties. I work, and making music. I look at it as like I love the gym. I love basketball. I love music. Those are certain things I do, and it's just like a part of like things that fulfill me. And so I'm gonna just keep doing it. If people want, if it becomes a career, cool. If not, that's cool too. I've just been doing it for a long time.
Right. What's the response been like to the Bitcoin videos in particular, like on Twitter and stuff like that? I mean,
Oh, it's been
I'm sure it's been pretty positive, but any particular standouts?
it's been overwhelmingly positive. But one thing, just from me observing my own work, is one thing that I find pretty rewarding is when I first started, my music production overshadowed the video production. But over time, my video production is slowly catching up and just getting just almost or close to my audio production and my music itself. So just personal development wise, I just find like I've been getting better at video production, as well as just distilling these ideas, because Bitcoin has really grand ideas, like at least the things in the world of Bitcoin, distilling it into a short idea into a 2 minute video or something along those lines. It's just been very good at just being more precise with the messaging. It's been making
Mm,
me better at it.
nice. Is there a particular aspect of Bitcoin that you find most fascinating? And I'll give you some context for that question. Like, there's many aspects of Bitcoin, of course, the monetary history case, the current macroeconomic case, the Renaissance 2.0, the individual transformation and kind of shift in perspective, like we mentioned, the time preference piece, all that kind of stuff. So I like to, on this podcast in particular, like to delve into like how this has changed people's behavior. And
Yeah,
what I usually say is like, if something doesn't change people's behavior, then what's its relevance really? And so the fact that this thing is changing people's perception and therefore their behavior so dramatically and so positively and so consistently, like to me, that is just the most insanely interesting phenomenon on the go. But is there an aspect that you like to focus on or that you're particularly intrigued by in Bitcoin that ends up inspiring a lot of your work?
of late I've been I guess looking far out into the future, like long after we're gone. So one of the, and I guess they call it being getting cosmic with Bitcoin or whatever. you know and one thing I do like is like in the video where I did sample you in American Hotto, where you talk about the Where's My Mind remix, one I remixed by the Pixies.
That was
you
awesome.
know that one, I remember your line really like you, because I had this concept that I thought of that was similar to the line you said, where you said these predicates that were human civilization were based upon. I'm assuming you meant property and how we defend these property rights or whatever. And then and you said that line where like, what does it mean when we're going to build this? What is civilization going to look when these predicates aren't even necessary because the Bitcoin network already handles a lot of it?
Mm-hmm.
Knut van Home, he says, knowing is owning. And then it's similar to this whole concept of property. And I just been thinking about these words that, for me, the future, I think about this futuristic Bitcoin world where just these certain words are just like flipped on its head, and the things we think of as property today or whatever it is today isn't the same in the Bitcoin world. And for me, it's just redefining words such as of recent times, you're seeing the concept of yield, things blowing up. We're trying to attach BI games to the Bitcoin world, but after seeing all this recently and just trying to redefine words to me, the concept of yield has changed, or the concept of ownership. Because to me, yield, like when we talk about yield in the fiat sense, you're talking about percentages. You're talking about these numbers that are getting these nominal gains on whatever it is. But after seeing these last couple months, I've been really like trying to refocus on this word. I don't know why, but yield to me in the Bitcoin standard, yielding might be like the Sistine Chapel or a very beautiful painting. To me, a lot of these old works are still yielding returns today, or like a beautiful building is still yielding returns. It could yield returns 1,000 years into the future, 100 years into the future. And so like Bitcoin's redefining, like reshaping how I view certain things. And I wonder how that looks like after many iterations into the future.
That's interesting. So you mean that yield taking on a non-financial definition?
Exactly, because I remember last summer I was helping my uncle. He was building a temple in Southern California. I was helping him, so me and a couple cousins, we were helping him. And he doesn't. There is an investment of his time and energy, but there is no yield. in terms of whether it be fiat dollars or so, there's nothing coming back other than
Mm,
they're getting a place of worship, a place to get congregate and worship and come together for his
mm,
community. And to me, so like things like that, like yield, or in your video, the video where I sampled you, you're talking about property. The concept of property is going to change. It's almost like a private key, like our current viewership of property, it doesn't really apply to Bitcoin, because me and you could know the same private key, and in that case, who owns the Bitcoin?
mm.
So for me, it's just all these redefining, just redefining your perspective and how you view certain things.
Yeah, well, I guess that's always the hallmark of a paradigm shift. And if we're making the case that Bitcoin is the biggest paradigm shift, then perhaps that's to be expected. But to go back to the yield thing, I'm sure you've heard the joke. I think Alan Farrington, I don't know if he made it up, but
Yeah.
I've seen him wear the T-shirt. Yield is the friends we made along the way, which is kind of like tongue-in-cheek critique of the yield farming and all that kind of shit that's happened in the space. So you lost all your money, but you still have some friends perhaps. But it is an interesting point that perhaps we will place more focus or emphasis, or at least be more aware on what we get from our investment, from our work, that perpetuates even beyond our own experience, perhaps, like the non-financial returns of doing anything really. And I think that, your example of the church is a good one, or a place of worship, or like just like
Or
that
something
yield.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or exactly, or something beautiful, a piece of music or artwork or video. Like
Yeah.
the yield on that, or the return on that, just is able to perpetuate and continue for, however long the piece of art or the output of the work is able to persist. And how do you put a value on how much satisfaction, inspiration, joy, all these things that people get out of those works, and should you, or can you factor that into motivation and or planning for actually doing work, for actually undertaking a project? And I think, in this paradigm where people have less anxiety about the future, they're more financially stable, they have more financial security, therefore they can pursue things that are more meaningful. I think like that domain of consideration will dramatically open up to people, because you're able to slowly get off the hamster wheel where you're just basically trying to survive and you're trying to stave off deprivation. And when you have that greater abundance of time, when you have that greater abundance of security, when you have that more sort of like mental clarity or calmness or peace, then you can focus on like, okay, what do I want to devote myself to? And what are the returns or so-called yields that I'm looking to get out of it? And maybe it has nothing to do with a financial return. Maybe you're like, I'm going
Yeah.
to devote myself to like a year of working. And what I hope to produce at the end of it, I hope that the benefit of that is people being, a million people being inspired, or people being able to be inspired for even after I'm gone, or just pure enjoyment that people are able to access in some way. Like, I think the luxury of being able to consider our work in that way is one of the benefits that Bitcoin is delivering. And I think it's going to be beautiful when more and more people are put in a position where they can look at things in that way, where it's not always about reducing your relative scarcity, let's say, but when you're actually considering how to deploy your limited resources in ways that will return the intangibles, like joy and
Mhm.
like happiness and that kind of stuff, and not just how much what's my financial gain from undertaking this activity.
Yeah, it's like how I started. I tell you, I get this childlike joy when I make some of these songs and tell these stories and see it come to fruition. Now that I thought about it, like that is the yield.
Yeah,
Like this
yeah.
feeling that, like, because some people, like, they get to old age and they just become bitter. Yeah,
Mm,
and that could be because that's how they are, or it could be the system just working against them. Where like all their actions just seem to never amount to like to a hopeful future or whatever it is, and they just get battered down and beaten.
mm,
And for me, like, yeah, because of Bitcoin, it's changed the trajectory of the way I was moving forward. And like this, even just things like just making a song, like that's just a, in the grand scheme of things, it's just very trivial. It's just something I do in my free time. It just provided me this joy that just keeps me rejuvenated and positive and feeling grateful too, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it was in one of your recent videos that uh, Sailor alluded to that as well, or basically
Yeah,
reflected
the
on
big
that,
thing is
saying that,
hope.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
and because, I guess I asked him why, and he said something to the effect that, like, the current system grinds people down. It doesn't deliver to them what they need, to be lifted up and to be ambitious and to be hopeful. And and as you say, that can result in that person that you just alluded to that might be bitter at the end of their career because they've just been staving off deprivation their whole life and not engaging in the things that actually bring meaning and joy and value into their life. And Bitcoin is hope because it's a mechanism that actually allows that to be reversed, actually allows people to now shift the focus and bring those things more into their life and more into abundance. Or, not necessarily. I mean, they can still pursue material ends, but they would be far more free to determine what those are for themselves rather than, again, being subject to the deprivations or subject to relative scarcity as a result of being stolen from surreptitiously, and without any means of stopping that. And that's certainly been, again, another observation for me. Like, if you look out in Bitcoin land, and as you said earlier, like, how much of it is represented on Twitter? Probably not very much of it, but to the extent that it is, I see a lot of that sort of behavior where Bitcoiners engage in things that, like, are not financially rewarding, let's say. They
Yeah.
do them out of pure inspiration. They do them out of pure contribution. They do them out of charity, like
Mhm.
multiple non-financial reward reasons. And I think, and there's a specific reason for many of them, let's say, or a primary reason, but I think, like, somewhere around there is like, uh, they want to access, I mean, they're clearly doing it because it's meaningful, and the meaning is not nominal, not financial. And that just seems to be so common now as to be a norm. Like, people are so motivated and inspired by this thing that they're willing to ostensibly sacrifice, resources, like, or waste resources from the conventional sense to contribute or create in this way. But what they receive in return is definitionally more valuable than what they've given up, and therefore it's obviously not a waste. And in many cases, it's tremendously inspiring to many people beyond themselves. As is the case with your work and other creators in the space, writers in the space, all sorts of things. And so, the thing I like to, or that gives me goosebumps occasionally, is like, I wind the clock forward 5 years on that, because
Mhm.
it's so early, and even a few years ago, none of that was really that apparent. Of course, like,
No.
devs were devoting their time to working on Bitcoin Core, let's say, and other stuff like that, but not on the same scale whatsoever. And three short years later, I mean, it's far more apparent. And so what about 5 years from now, when
Yeah.
presumably the value of Bitcoin is much higher, there's way more people in the space, there's way more avenues to express those sort of sentiments. It's just, well, I can't wait, which is why I'm so grateful to be
I know
able
what
to
you
have a
mean.
front row seat for it.
Because even like last cycle, I think 90% of the content you would see was just trading talk. It was just
Right.
like, it was charts. It was like 90% of the space was charts outside of the technical stuff. And I think the only person that would push it to people that can understand, like me, was probably Andreas.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
probably, like, there's very few. And back to the whole giving, like, the more the givers in the Bitcoin space, where you're talking about, like, these people are not doing it, a lot of it aren't isn't for financial reward, because there's just not a big market for this stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that has to tie back to the time preference, right? The lower your time preference becomes, you're more able to give because you're more certain of the future. And
Hmm.
so I think that has to come back to the time preference. And maybe because interacting with Bitcoin extends your time horizon long enough, where it really does change us, where we're like, we can do rewarding things like give, because giving, you know one of the things I always believed in is, like, as much you give and you get back. And so, yeah, I think that has probably has to link with the time preference, at least
Yeah.
when I think of it initially.
Yeah. And the same is true for that same reason for, like, undertaking great works. Like you mentioned it, a church a few minutes ago. And, you think about these like insanely inspiring monuments around the world. And I know, again, there's been various motivations, and, in some cases it was a top-down approach, and slaves were, employed to build
Yeah.
these things, but other times it was artists and artisans who, out of their own inspiration, wanted to glorify an idea, basically, or create a place of worship, or showcase showcase something inspiring, and came together to make it. And the more, I think, the more a society is oriented towards low time preference, because perhaps the money in use and the other cultural factors that are downstream of that, uh, the more of that you get, but also the more, I think, like the more amazing it is, or the greater quality is, because all those people, are so capable of committing and devoting themselves to the work. And so you don't get as many cut corners, you don't, you're not rushing things, all that stuff. And so quality really gets to shine through. And the reason for undertaking that work, the inspiration and the the joy and the meaning, can be like really showcased. It really gets imbued in the work as a result of simply that capacity to simply the availability of the time to do it, the availability for all those people involved to have the time, to it not be a tremendous sacrifice, basically. Like they can bear it, and they're not going to starve, and their families aren't going to starve, and all that kind of stuff. And we as cultures and societies and civilizations, I mean, it almost seems the case that maybe we always take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because like the capital foundation that people have available to is that people have to avail of, let's say, continues to degrade or
Grow.
dissolve over a few generations, for a variety of reasons: confiscations, inflation, revolution, whatever. And I don't think we'll completely, Bitcoin is not going to completely resolve that, because I think there'll always be a circularity to development. And I think there'll always be the pitfalls of apathy and comfort and things like that. But it does seem to be the case that, like, the capital stock, the capital foundation, the foundation of wealth that each individual and each family, and as a result a society, has, will be far more impervious to that kind of degradation, to wherever, whatever instigates that degradation, or whatever the cause of it is. And as a result, I mean, the starting point of wealth in time, and therefore the starting point of, like, determining what's most valuable and meaningful, and then applying your work and applying your trade in that direction, will be so much more available to people. And that should necessitate and foster and contribute to a far more beautiful, abundant, I would say peaceful, fulfilling, meaningful culture and society. Would it not?
Yeah, I agree. And because I like to, I sometimes try to catch myself too, because I think of those things a lot as well, of like what it means when we can just protect ourselves from the, like you said, the degradation of society, and individuals having a tool that can protect themselves. But I do like to think about Bitcoin and its incentives, because sometimes when we think like that, I personally, I get too utopian sometimes. Like like, you know what I mean? It's just like, chill out, chill out. Bitcoin's not a utopia. I always have to remind myself, like, especially when I'm preaching Bitcoin. But the incentives does, like you say, like, allows for like for individuals to at the least protect themselves from like a society, if you have a society that's less productive, or a society where these things erode and degrade. At least there is this tool to protect you. And I like to think of Bitcoin, and I like to think of these systems in winners and losers. The fiat system incentivizes, I guess you would say, theft, or that Cantillon, chasing that Cantillon position, or
Mhm.
chasing to be in a position of like the Cantillon alpha, I guess you would say.
Right.
And
That's
where,
a good term.
and then in the Bitcoin world, where it's like the incentives is, I don't like, to me, yes, we do depend on others in the Bitcoin world, but like individually, whatever you produce, or whatever you and a other group of individuals can produce, the incentives align with the individual more so than like the parasite. I guess, or the Catalan alpha. I'm gonna start using that word now.
No, that's I like the term, and I totally agree, and that's why I think it's so sustainable, is because
Exactly.
the incentives basically align, and people are able to keep the fruits of their labor and then have the capacity to exchange them with everyone else. And I that's why I think it leads to more peace and more abundance and greater security. And again, I mean, of course, we all have to check ourselves. I mean, we can be forgiven, right? Because this is such a radically different, such a radically new thing for us to comprehend and contend with. And we're trying to connect all the dots. And once you connect the dots, remember those like children's books where you connect the dots and what you end up drawing like a castle or something.
Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yep.
I don't know how long it's gonna last for.
All right. Well, what happened? The battery on your AirPods died or something?
Yeah,
Or
my batteries and AirPods are dying. I forgot to check it.
can you use the mic or the speaker on your phone?
Yeah, it's busted. My phone's pretty busted.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. Well, we'll shut it down soon. But on the utopia question, like my point was just that we're all trying to figure out what this means, right? And as
Yeah.
we do that, we try to be intellectually honest. We try not to, delude ourselves, but it does seem like, if you analyze history up to this point, you try to analyze like what those predicates were that manifested the world we have today, and you say, okay, what happens if you switch those out? What happens if you fundamentally change the characteristics of those things? What logically would you expect to result from that? And I think, many of us, that's the Bitcoin Renaissance sort of vision. And I think it's good I think it's going to be really, really, really positive. But as you say, there is no utopia and there will always be problems. And if for no other reason that we get complacent and we get apathetic, no matter how good the structure of the system that we're embedded within is. And so, as a side note, I think that's why kind of ritual and tradition is going to be such an important thing in a Bitcoin standard, because I think that's going to be one method, probably among many, of reminding ourselves, and let's say it's done on a family or community or even a state or a larger level, but these sort of rituals are going to be used, or traditions, to remind us of the things that are valuable, that we ought not to forget, to try to avoid the pitfalls of the past, knowing that they're ultimately unavoidable, but perhaps mitigate how destructive they might be, as the cycles of history wax and wane and we move forward.
I like to think of Bitcoin not needing these traditions or rituals, because like if you don't hold your keys, or if you don't run your node, or you rely on somebody else to do all this for you, like you say, like if like let's say 5 generations and your kids they decide, I don't want to take the ownership of owning my own keys, I'm gonna give it to this version of FTX or whatever, so like it almost like
Natural
Bitcoin,
selection.
it's a system. It just self-regulates itself and just weeds those people out. Oh, you want to put your coins on Mt. Gox, or like the version of that in 50 years or in 30 years or something. And
Yeah.
so that's how I like to look at it. And so the trajectory is away from the Mt. Gox, is away from the Celsius and all these centralized institutions.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think even something like your key ceremony, like your coming of age ceremony, like that might even be a thing within families. Like, okay, son or daughter, you're 13 now. This is your entry into adulthood. Maybe there's other aspects of that in terms of knowledge and experience and taking responsibility. But one of them might be like, now is when you take charge or responsibility for your keys for yourself. Dad's not, mom and dad aren't doing it for you anymore. And that is kind of ceremonialized because of how important it is, and it gives them the proper context, the proper weight, the proper gravity, the proper setup. But even though I agree, like I think this system helps to self-regulate in that way, and it just punishes people who don't treat it properly, and that self-corrective mechanism will go a long way to producing what we would probably deem positive outcomes in society. I just do think, I think we will discover, like all these themes that we've been discussing, like value and meaning and and work and what to devote ourselves to when we're out of a state of deprivation, you know, and we can determine how we're going to deploy our resources outside of a context of necessity, let's say. I think those sort of things might inspire the refinement or the evolution or the reintroduction of tradition in some ways, because I feel like we'll discover meaning, or things will become of sufficient value, and we'll want to glorify it really, and remember it in certain ways, and possibly in ways that are somewhat superordinate maybe to just the self-regulating mechanism of
You know,
Bitcoin
I do
itself.
agree with you. Like these rituals around like these very technical things, whether it's possessing your own private key, making certain transactions. I have been trying to, like I think I told you earlier, I've been trying to personify or make symbolize these very technical aspects of Bitcoin. And maybe all the people who creating it, whether they be pictures, art, paintings, writings, whatever, like, or music, I've been trying to symbolize these very technical things into this, you know, beyond just, I just did a cryptographic signature, you know, beyond that. And so
Right.
like give it this a way to make it into a ritual or a ceremony, like you say. And so like
Mhm.
maybe this all this music and all this art and all this cultural things around Bitcoin is driving us towards that ritualistic and ceremonial aspects of something pretty darn technical.
Yeah, I think that could definitely be the case. And then, you know, another one that seems to be emerging already in the space is like people's relationship to food seems to be changing, at least for some. Again, like I always
For
generalize.
me, it did. I did at first. I was like, man, because I read safety, and I was like, he's crazy, you know. And then my brother sent me Jordan Peterson video and Sean Baker on Rogan. I watched it, and then I did it for 2 years. I went carnivore for 2 years, and I wasn't like I was like in decent shape, and then I just lost a lot of even more weight. I thought I was already, and I just lost more weight, and so yeah, it definitely it does make you question everything, whether it be food, politics, everything.
Right, right. But that's exactly my point. So I think that will happen for all areas. But I think one of the potential outcomes of that is like, do I still got you?
Yeah, you still here.
Okay, I lost your video, but just checking you're still there. Um, I think one of the like, for example, let's say when you have that new relationship to food, like I see it happening, and I see it happening with myself, like changing diet, wanting to have a different relationship to my food, wanting to have a direct relationship to the farmer who grows it or raises the cattle, maybe even wanting to be there in the process of harvesting that meat and ceremonializing that in some way to express my gratitude for the farmer's work, for the animal's life, for all the process that goes into it. Like I can, and all of that just by virtue of the changing perception or meaning that I'm ascribing to my relationship to my own sustenance. And then what, you know, and of course there's a reciprocal sort of meaning there. It's like, well, if I'm going to accept and and express my gratitude for the work of the farmer and the sacrifice of the animal, let's say, how does that influence how I treat myself? Right? Like, how does that influence how I determine my own action in order to express my gratitude for that? And so all of that taken together, you could very easily see ritual forming around that, because it's such an important thing, such a meaningful thing. And so I don't know what shape that will take, but just to say, I think those are the types of things, by virtue of our changed perception of and changed relationship to all these different things, food and otherwise, I can see that amplified meaning coalescing into rituals and traditions that end up becoming more refined and more refined and more ingrained into our lives and our culture and that kind of thing. All right. Well, Richard is having technical problems, so we're gonna have to shut it down, and he won't be able to respond. But Richard, thank you for taking the time, man. I appreciate your work. Can't wait to see more of it in the future, and we will do this again sometime. Peace, brother.